Today we are tackling the hardest thing to get right. Well, what I believe is the hardest thing to get right, and I'll tell you why, in IVF, which is your priming protocol. So in 2022, I started putting together the formula to IVF. I really didn't think it was possible. I actually didn't even want to do it, but I was like, I have to figure this out. Priming protocols is what I spent the vast majority of my time on, because it's the hardest thing to figure out, because there's so many reasons why you prime. There's so many options for it. And then the options even change strength depending on when you start it and how long you're doing it. You just see, when it comes to all these other ones, stimulation, medication, dosing, that's like one thing. It's based on antral follicle count, right? The trigger shot, that's typically based on your age. Like, all these other ones are so much simpler to just give an overview for, but not priming. Okay, so that's why I wanted to really go over this. I'm going to get into all the reasons why your doctor should consider priming, but some of them include if you don't get a menstrual cycle or you don't ovulate, what your FSH is, what your AMH is, antral follicle count, AFC, and more, right? What shouldn't be considered when it comes to your priming protocol is your clinic's schedule. This drives me bananas. If you are working with a clinic that is not open every day of the week, that doesn't do procedures every day of the week. So maybe they batch clients and everybody does their egg retrieval, 1 week or 2 weeks of the month. Your priming is not based on your biology. It is purely to make their clinic's scheduling work. I cannot stand that. It cannot lead to your best results. And I have a feeling you're not getting a discount on your IVF because you're not getting optimized IVF for you. I just have a feeling. And in fact, I do know, because I know the clinics that do this and I know what they charge. So that is what should not be considered in your priming protocol. Absolutely ask your doctor if they batch clients, if they're open every day of the week. And if the answer is, I do batch clients and I'm not open every day of the week, I don't know if I'd work there. Okay, but we are going to walk through what priming is and why it's used. Typical medications your doctor might consider, the range of priming protocols from most suppressive to least suppressive, situations where priming might be helpful or harmful, and finally, how to tell if your priming medication worked well for you versus if it's time to have a conversation with your doctor about another strategy. This content was all taken from my first book that is in editing right now. Don't rush me. Just kidding. I can't stop editing it though. That is a real thing. Just rip it out of my hands at this point. But my book, which is coming out soon, called Kiss Your Baby Sooner. There is a book on fertility optimization. There is a book on IVF optimization. And this is taken out of the section of priming protocols. I'm so excited for this book to come out for you guys. Absolutely sign up for our newsletter, because those that are, you're basically going to get the book for free when it comes out. So make sure you're on our newsletter. And by the way, I also send pretty cool stuff on our newsletter. It's always going to be advice-based, or it's going to be something to inspire you to keep going, because you are a warrior mama and you're freaking amazing and you need to be told that once in a while. All right, let's start with priming. The whole idea of priming is, well, again, there's various reasons to do it, but majority of the time, your doctor wants to quiet your ovaries, because what happens in nature, your ovaries, as soon as ovulation's over, they're like, all right, it's like Santa with Christmas. All right, it's December 26th. Let's get started and, ready to go. But this is a 28-day cycle, of course, for Christmas for your ovaries. But as soon as you ovulate, that is where the next steps begin. All right, who is going to be the alpha this month? whose ovary, which, whose turn is it? It's right side. Okay, great. We're going to work with you and we're going to select the follicle. Yes, sometimes 2 follicles, right? But typically this is the alpha follicle. This alpha follicle is going to get all the love, all the nutrients, all the food, all the energy. The rest of you are just a supporting role. Thank you very much for showing up. You can now be reabsorbed back into the body. Thank you. We love you. So that's what happens naturally. And so what the priming protocol is meant to do is to just stop the ovaries from making a decision about the alpha before it's time for the medication, which is like the food. So everybody gets fed the food, not just the alphas, because the alpha wasn't picked. Everybody has a chance to become the alphas. So that is typically the main reasons why priming happens. Again, unless it's, hey, I don't get a cycle or I don't ovulate and your doctor needs to force a cycle, they're probably going to give you, birth control to then once you stop taking it, you get a bleed. Then they know, okay, we have a cycle day 1, we can start medication, for example. And then the last reason why your doctor is typically considering priming is to lengthen your cycle. So if your cycle day 1 to ovulation is very short, I hope, and by very short, I mean less than 11 days. So cycle day 1 to ovulation is less than 11 days. I hope your doctor will want to lengthen that because that's the growth of the egg. And low and slow is the way to go, right? Really slow growth, low follicle size along the way, even follicle growth. That is the way to build a beautiful, healthy, egg inside the follicle that is hardy enough to not just fertilize, be mature, fertilize, but also grow into an embryo. Okay, this is why sometimes when we see really fast growth, or if somebody always has a short cycle, they don't tend to make healthy embryos. Why? Yes, that egg may have been mature, it may have fertilized, but it just grew too fast. It's not going to be a hardy, healthy embryo. Other times to do priming medication are if you have a high FSH around cycle day 1 through 3. This means your ovaries are already talking. So higher FSH, what do I mean by high? Typically over 10. And you want to have a little bit of priming medication to get it under 10. Now, if your FSH around cycle day 1 through 3 is over 15 versus over 20 versus over 30, these are all going to be different strategies for priming. So for example, if it's over 30, we may not be able to, or we may not want to try to get your FSH under 10, because the way to do that means you really have to shut down your ovaries, and that's not always a great thing, right? And so if you have an FSH over 30, that typically means you have a lower AMH, a lower follicle count, so your eggs might be more sensitive. This typically all goes with it. Sensitive eggs, lower count, higher FSH. So you need to be careful with that suppression medication, that priming medication. I wouldn't just keep going till we see it go under 10. I would probably, again, it depends on what the actual results are and what we see, but I would start with probably a less suppressive priming medication. Okay, let's go with the most suppressive priming medication would be birth control, but I would want to check the levels after around 2 weeks. So around 12 days on combination birth control, check the levels. If it's close enough, maybe under 15, I would move forward and I wouldn't keep going. Probably. It totally depends on what the actual results are. But I would try to do a little bit less suppressive medication, such as a norethisterone, to see, or even maybe possibly estrogen. I don't think that's going to be suppressive enough, but I have seen estrogen alone just bring down FSH really nicely. So these are all strategies for when your FSH is high, you always want to start with the least suppressive priming, and then gradually go to a little bit more suppressive. But again, if your FSH is over 30, you need to be careful being too suppressive to make it under 10, your FSH, because you might have more sensitive follicles. Does that all make sense? Right? So now you see why writing a formula for priming medication was so hard. Okay, another reason to consider priming medication is if your follicle count is too high, right? So forget your FSH, what's your AMH, and what is your follicle count? I tend to like to know what the AMH is, because if it's done in a lab and it was done correctly, of course your AMH can be off, but let's say consistently it's been the same month to month for a few months, so we know it's correct. If your AMH is over 3, definitely if your AMH is over 7, so there's a priming medication for if your AMH is over 3, because we need to be careful about, and you may not have to prime if it's over 3, depending on also your follicle count. Gosh, I hope this is helpful. And it's not just me, this is how my brain works, but it always is based on your actual results. And this is why giving you guys advice, I love it. I try to do it in a general sense, but it really has to depend on your actual results. But I think you can use this. Okay. If your AMH is over 3, we may need to do priming medication. I would also want to look at your follicle count. If your follicle count is naturally over 20, definitely over 30, you're probably going to want some priming to just calm things down a bit. You're definitely going to want to watch what kind of stimulation medication you're on, the dosing, and the trigger shot. When you get into those high levels, and I know now I'm talking about trigger shots, but here I go. Trigger shot should probably be Lupron only, not HCG. Okay. If your AMH is over 7 and follicle count, AFC, is over 30, and especially if your follicle count tends to be over 30 towards the trigger shot, this is a whole other level of priming. You almost definitely, I don't know a situation where you wouldn't if your AMH is over 7 and your follicle count is over 30, but I would have to think about it. You definitely want priming to calm everything down, or else your stimulation medications, it will just be a mess. It's too many follicles. They need to simmer down. They need to be in a calm state. There's just too many of them, right? Just think about all these follicles, just too many. You need to calm down and slow things down a bit. Otherwise, you're going to end up with really uneven growth, hardly any usable embryos, probably ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, OHSS. So all the priming starts with making sure those things don't happen. Now, you want as many follicles as possible to go into the stimulation medication if you have these really high follicle counts, but you also want to avoid uneven follicles, because that means only a couple will be the right size anyway. And you definitely want to avoid OHSS, because that will just ruin your entire egg retrieval cycle. Okay, and I think I mentioned this, but this goes along with, at the baseline ultrasound. So at your, cycle day 1 through 3, we want your FSH to be under 10. We want your estrogen, I believe I already said this, to be under 80, unless you're doing estrogen priming. If you're doing estrogen priming, we want it under 200. And we want your follicle count, your follicle sizes to be under 10. Like, I like way under 10. I like, 3 or 4, or 4 or 5 max. Because as all of these higher estrogen, higher FSH, higher follicle size at cycle day 1 through 3, these are all signs that they're on the move. The ovaries have already started talking. They're making things happen. And it's probably too late to slow things down without kind of going back and starting to prime now. So these are all reasons. These are all things that priming can be used really successfully to achieve. Next, I'm going to talk about the typical priming medication. And just keep in mind, you are always given the same priming protocol, and your doctor isn't talking about these other options. And by the way, no priming is a great option, and for some, and we're going to go over that as well, right? But if they're only talking about, if they're ever only mentioning one type of priming medication, one way, like that's a red flag to me. So here are some typical priming medications that your doctor might consider. So next, let's talk about, we know the medications. What are the different levels of suppression of this medication? Because pending which medication you use, or even just which phase you use them in or how long you use them, it creates a more or less suppressive result. All right, so the most suppressive, again, I don't know if I've ever seen this more than once. I've never recommended this to one of my clients, and I've had all kinds of different profiles for clients, but the most suppressive is combination birth control with Lupron, or it's called a long Lupron protocol. Again, this is by far the most suppressive. I can't think of a situation where I would recommend that, but yeah, I'm sure there is. I just haven't had a client where I've been like, that should be their protocol. The next one is combination birth control, again, OCP, for more than 15 days in the follicular phase. So you start it probably cycle day 1 through 3, and you take it for more than 2 weeks. I tend to see, like when I was doing IVF, I found my medical records. I always did 3 weeks on birth control, and then I started my 300 Gonal-F, 150 Menopur. That was very cookie cutter. It was very unsuccessful. Okay. And that's what I've seen for most. So if you are on combination birth control for more than 2 weeks, you really need to discuss with your doctor or just ask your doctor why. What is their goal? Is it a certain FSH level that they want to get to? What is it? Is it a certain estrogen level, a certain, whatever level it is? Understand why you're doing it. The only time I would say, yeah, I get that, is if one, you had that AMH over 7, you probably need birth control for 3 weeks, but at 3 weeks, I would actually check your AMH to see if it's lowered to a nice enough level and your follicular count has lowered to a nice level before continuing any longer. Same thing with if your goal is to lower your FSH, if the doctor's goal is to lower the FSH, and they're like, you're going to be on it for 3 weeks to lower it. Okay, this is a great question for your doctor, can we check my FSH after 2 weeks, see where we're at, see if we need to continue it for another week? The goal is you always check your levels. So I would highly recommend that question. And I also wouldn't just stop birth control if you're taking it for a very specific result, like a hormone level. I wouldn't just stop it without getting that hormone level checked a couple days before you're supposed to stop it. Because once you stop it and then a couple days later you get your menstrual cycle, you can't just start it again. You have to wait. Well, I guess you can, but you shouldn't. But you have to wait for the whole other cycle. But if it's, oh my gosh, we're, 2 days before I want you to stop it, and we're right there, we're just not exactly where we want to be. You know what? Stay on it another 5 days, and then let's check again. Great. You didn't maybe lose a month because you stopped it too soon, weren't at the levels that the doctor wanted before continuing. Okay. So then there's also, not many people talk about this, but this is a less suppressive priming protocol, and it's luteal phase combination birth control. So you would start this about, 4-ish days after an LH surge. Another more moderate, less suppressive than typical birth control is norethisterone. That's the progesterone-based birth control. So when we see birth control, I'm typically meaning combination. Norethisterone is a progesterone-based. That is also, norethisterone can absolutely lengthen your cycle. It can lower your FSH. It does plateau typically after 14 days. So if you take it longer than 14 days, it typically stops doing what it's supposed to be doing, like lowering your FSH or lowering your estrogen. But it can absolutely lengthen your cycle. And this is also a great alternative for those that should not be taking synthetic estrogen, right? Prone to endometriosis. You do terrible on the birth control, like me. I was like a monster. These are all reasons to talk to your doctor about a norethisterone. And that is also taken in the luteal phase. You start at about 4 to 6 days after ovulation. And then there's estradiol priming in the luteal phase. So this is when you take estrogen, typically 4 to 6 days after LH surge, and you take it until you get your period. Okay, so now we're getting less and less and less suppressive. And then the last, least suppressive is no priming, or what is called a straight start. I actually love this, and it is hardly used, except in Europe, they use it a lot more. But you have an FSH under 10. You don't have a short ovulation or follicular phase. You get your cycle. You don't have an AMH that is over 3 or over 7. You don't have a follicle count that is like over 30. You could absolutely try no priming. And here's the thing, which is the irony of it all, is I know priming is meant to even up the follicles from the start, but sometimes these priming medications actually create more uneven growth because it creates suppression, and then you have to add in the medication for waking them up, and then depending on the dosing, it's too high. It creates uneven growth. It's like this whole thing. I have seen people have much more even growth with no priming. So it absolutely is an option if you don't fall under a category of I need to do priming. So when does priming go wrong? It doesn't do its job. It's not lowering your FSH. It's not lengthening your cycle. It's not lowering your AMH or AFC if they're really high, or it was just too suppressive. And you could tell because follicles that like your natural follicle count, your AFC, is a lot lower after priming, right? They do that baseline ultrasound and they're like, where's half the follicles? You might have been a little too suppressed on priming. Now, could those follicles show up with stimulation medication? Yes, just be gentle with that stimulation medication. And we know we know priming worked when your antral follicle count is basically the same with and without priming. All the follicles that were there grew, right? None of them got stalled. None of them got left behind. None of them raced ahead, right? If your follicles started off small sizes, FSH was low, estrogen was low, and it just grew nice and evenly, that probably means you had the right priming protocol. But check your monitoring reports, because if the follicles started to grow unevenly, but after 3, 4, 5, 6 days of stimulation medication, I would want to look at the dosing and the medications for stimulation, because after those initial days, that is typically when you start looking at if there's issues for uneven growth, I would look at most likely the stimulation medication. All right, so best strategies are always try to start with the least suppressive first. Understand why you're doing priming in the first place. What are the actual goals? Give me the numbers. How do we know we reach those goals? What do we do if we don't reach those goals? Is there a way to pivot before it's too late? Like, don't stop birth control unless you know for sure that you're at the levels your doctor wants you to be. Or, hey, if they're asking you to be on birth control, first of all, you want it at least 8 days. I don't think you want it more than 14, typically, again, depending why you're taking it. But if they say you're taking it for 21 days, okay, can we check it at 2 weeks? If they say you're taking it for 2 weeks, okay, can we check it at a day before I'm supposed to stop to just make sure we are where we want to be, right? It's always about setting this up from the start, so you're not in the middle of the round going, wait, we're not where we want to be, and now it's too late, and now we need to wait. And that's just annoying. So overall, Priming is what sets your cycle up for success from the start. There are so many options. There are so many, not only medications, but timing and length of time on those medications that affect success rates. The best choice is always going to be based on your initial inputs. And then, do we have any history on how you've responded to that medication for that length of time in the past? And I will say, if your doctor is not willing to adjust the way that they do their priming protocol for you, and it clearly isn't working, then it is prime time to find a new doctor that will.